All right. Well, in the interest of time, I will get started. It's 12:05. I'm sure others will come in. I'm Samantha Bosshart, the Executive Director of the Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation. I have been with the Saratoga Springs Preservation since 2008, which I'm pleased to still be here. I love working for the foundation and being a part of preserving the great city of Saratoga Springs. My background is in historic preservation. I have an undergraduate degree from Indiana University, and then I finished my coursework in historic preservation planning from Cornell University. I am the current chair of the National Preservation Partners Network, which is a network of local and statewide and local partners in preservation across the country. There are about 130 organizations that are members of that organization that are there to promote and to help preservation organizations to help the movement of preservation. I'm also an observer for the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, just to give you a bit of background from what I do. And with that, I would also like to thank the City of Saratoga Springs. This is a joint program with them. This program was funded through a certified local government grant through the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. So we want to give them a thank you as well for this program and their support of the program. Again, if anybody we'd love to see where you're chiming in from, so viewing from, if you'd be so kind to type that in the chat, we'd love to know. We saw people registered from Connecticut, from across the state, and further away. So we would love to hear from you. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to hold all questions until the end of the program. You can enter questions through the Q&A. That would be great. And we will circle back to those at the end of the program. We're going to get started. We're going to cover a lot of information here. I'm sorry, the chat appears to be disabled. Let's see if we can fix that. But in the meantime, we're going to try and cover a lot of groundwork, that being how the preservation movement started in the United States. Then we're going to cover the economic impacts of historic preservation, as well as the architectural styles. We will see if we can get working. I guess if the chat is not working, go ahead and just put in where you're coming from in the Q&A. That will work just as well. All right, let's get started, and I hope you are enjoying your lunch, and thank you again for tuning in. So where and how did preservation get started? Well, in 1816, the city of Philadelphia chose to buy and purchase Independence Hall, or what was then where at the time when the Declaration of Independence was signed was the Pennsylvania State House. They chose to buy that and then want to preserve it because of its significance in our American history. Then in 1836, we see Uriah Levy purchases Monticello, which was the home of Thomas Jefferson, and he initiates a renovation of the structure. Then, so we're talking more than 200 years ago that the preservation movement starts. And again, of course, we see that it's largely, these early efforts are associated with our early American history. So then we see the Hasbrook House, the headquarters of George Washington in Newburgh, be purchased by the state of New York to preserve that rich history. Oops, sorry, my apologies. And then we see Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. This was one of the first efforts recognized in historic preservation This was the home of the first president, as we all know, George Washington. And after noticing that the property was in a state of deterioration, a group of prominent women formed the Mount Vernon Ladies Association in 1853. They purchased the property, supervised and managed and administrated the site as a place where citizens could pay homage to one of its great leaders. The success of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association influenced and established similar organizations and efforts, and this group set the tone for era's preservation activities, which focused on the houses of great American male leaders. During this period, private citizens and organizations were the primary leaders in emerging historic preservation movement. While the properties of national significance and those associated with great American leaders remain the prominent focus, at that time, the movement of preservation has expanded greatly over time, and we're starting to see so many other stories, not just of the white, rich male, which has long been what a lot of people unfortunately think of preservation, but it's now about neighborhoods and regular people and those who help build our cities. In 1906, you see the National Antiquities Act. This is the first federal historic preservation legislation. It came out of the growing conservation movement. The adverse effects of rising industrialism, coupled with the nation's expansion westward, stimulated great interest in nature, particularly in the Southwest and in Native cultures. So we see in 1906, Congress passed the Antiquities Act. The act made destruction of nationally significant sites and antiquities a criminal offense, and it gave the president authority to designate properties as national monuments. Most important, by enacting this legislation, the federal government acknowledged that it considered historic, cultural, and natural resources to be important and worthy being preserved for the benefit of citizens. President Theodore Roosevelt proclaimed Devil's Tower the first national monument on September 24th, 1906. The conservation movement also inspired the establishment of the National Park Service in 1916, which grew to become a major player in both natural and historic preservation, significantly increased the federal government's role. While properties of national significance and those associated with great American leaders remain the prominent focus of preservation through the most progressive area, ideas of what should be preserved began to expand. Preservations began to acknowledge the importance of architecture and aesthetics in their own right, and interest arose in the history of ordinary people and everyday life. A significant turning point is in the concept of historic preservation took place in 1931, when the citizens of Charleston, South Carolina, established the first local historic district in an effort to protect the town's historic resources against the negative impact of automobile traffic. This action broadened historic preservation to include whole neighborhoods. It also acknowledged the importance of vernacular housing and homes of local citizens, as well as those of great Americans. Charleston also set a precedent in zoning legislation and the use of laws to establish and enforce and protect preservation concerns at the local level by local ordinance, and created a board of architectural review to oversee it. New Orleans would follow not long after in 1937 and to protect the French Quarter. In 1935, the Historic Sites Act passed by Congress to establish historic preservation policy, established policy to, quote, preserve for public use historic sites, buildings, and objects of national significance for the inspiration and benefit of the United States, the people of the United States. In 1962, we here in the state of New York see the Stockade Historic District be the first local historic district in New York. In 1963 was a landmark moment with the demolition of the Pennsylvania Station. Pennsylvania Station, the masterwork of McKean, Mead, and White. This event begins a huge public outcry in New York City and across the country. It is considered one of the seminal events in the modern preservation movement. That, along with the federal highway program and urban renewal programs, that inspired or triggered what became the National Historic Preservation Act, which was passed in 1966. Major provisions established preservation roles for federal, state, and local levels of government. And then you see not until 1980 that New York State sees the Historic Preservation Act passed. So that gives you a really brief overview of the history of the preservation movement here in the city and here in the country, and gives you a little bit of the timeline for New York State. I would love to go into the history of the preservation movement here in Saratoga Springs, but if I were to do that, that would take a whole nother hour and a different presentation. And since we're focusing on the basics, that's what we're going to stick to. So moving on, what are some of the common myths about preservation? You hear it all of the time, at least I do in my role. Historic preservationists only want to keep buildings exactly the same. If I own a historic building, I can't make any changes to the exterior. If I own a historic building, I cannot make any changes to the interior. A historic building cannot meet modern needs. It is more expensive than new construction. Also, there are some other ones. If I buy a historic house, there's funding available to pay for rehabilitation costs. Preservation is only for the rich and elite and for high-style buildings. Historic buildings are not energy efficient nor sustainable, or historic designation will reduce property values. So we're going to go through all these myths. Granted, not as exciting because I don't have any fun pictures, but we'll walk through them and go through it. Historic preservations only want to keep buildings exactly the same. That's absolutely not true. Historic preservation is not meant to prevent change, but it's about rather managing that change. What does that change look like? Our city, historic preservation and the movement and the people that are work in that field understand that our buildings, our cities, our places, they evolve over time. And you have to recognize that, and that things will need to continue to change to be able to remain viable and vibrant places. If I own a historic house, I can't make any changes to the exterior. Owners of a designated historic district may be able to make very significant changes to their structures depending on how the project is funded and whether or not it's located in a local historic district. Listing on the National Register of Historic Places is largely an honorary designation. Owners can make changes to the interior and exterior of buildings as well as demolish a building without seeking any permission. Only when state or federal dollars are being used is there a review required. Now, in a different instance, a property located in a local historic district does require review of exterior changes, new construction, and demolition. However, that does not mean that changes like new construction or demolition are not allowed. It does require review, and then there are different standards of how new construction and or demolition will be considered. If I own a historic building, I cannot make any changes to the interior. There is no local oversight for interior changes. Now, however, if you are seeking the use of historic tax credits, which historic tax credits are available for the state and the federal government, these tax credits help to offset rehabilitation costs, and they're eligible for only certain properties. To learn more about that, again, that would require a separate presentation. You can learn more about that through the state's Historic Preservation Office website, which I should have put in the slide, and I apologize. But if you Google tax credit programs and historic preservation New York State, it will easily come up because it's a searchable web page. But for exterior and interior changes for those tax credit programs, there's what's called the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. And that serves as the basis for evaluating changes to historic structures. The standards do not require that every element of a historic building remain intact. For example, it's not required to keep every piece of hardware or every door. However, the most significant or, quote, character-defining historic elements of a property should be retained. That may be windows, like the prominent front door, porch elements. There's different aspects that might be considered character-defining features. New additions to historic property are allowed, but should be compatible with the site's historic architecture. The standards promote the repair of deteriorated historic features, but do allow for replacement when severely deterioration leaves no other option. A historic building cannot meet modern needs. There are many different ways to approach a historic building. Look beyond the existing layout and design. Consider creative options. There are options that are appropriate for rehabilitation or adaptive reuse. A well-designed expansion or addition to an original structure can add elevators, entries, bathrooms, stairs, and square footage. How a space functions can change by moving, adding, and removing walls. Such changes can impact as they complement or contrast with more historic aspects of the building, making a project especially unique and memorable. However, in anticipating claiming historic tax credits, confirm that those changes are in step with the rules of the tax credit programs, or that they're in keeping with the local historic review guidelines, which I will talk about in a little bit. Preservation is only for rich and elite and high-style buildings. That is no longer the case. Preserving is really not only about the finest examples of architecture now. It's about preserving diverse range of social and cultural and architectural heritage. That small building that may appear to only be very simple in style may tell a story of different members of our community, whether that's women, the Black community, the Jewish community. It can be so many more things than what preservation was initially founded on. And I think it's really important to think about that. Historic buildings are not energy efficient or sustainable. That's definitely not the case. Most newly constructed buildings are use less energy compared to historic buildings, but existing buildings can be made to be competitively energy efficient. One also looks at all the energy to make the building materials and embodied energy. New buildings require a great deal of new energy to produce the materials. This includes energy to get the raw materials, transport those materials to the place of processing, then to be manufactured into a product, and energy to transport the finished project. Meaning, like, when you have an existing building, there's this incredible amount of embodied energy in the existing building that you can't replicate. It takes energy to construct a new building. It also saves energy to preserve an existing one. And there's many ways to talk about how to make your historic building energy efficient. And we hope to touch on that in a future program. Historic designations will reduce property values. Now, this is one of there's never been a study that proves that it does reduce property values. There's only been multiple studies done that actually shows that property values are higher with historic designation. And we're going to take some time through this presentation to look at what was a 2018 economic impact study here in Saratoga Springs that reviewed 20 years of MLS data. And in fact, our study was one of the first of a small community to ever be done. And we were thrilled to be part of that. And that was done with PlaceEconomics, which is a nationally recognized now I'm drawing my economic preservation consultant or economic consultant. So I'm just going to go over some of that, but historic designation gives a neighborhood or an individual site personality that sets it apart from other places. Many buyers seek out unique qualities and ambiance of historic properties and historic downtowns. I mean, we see it in Saratoga every day. In fact, restoration, adaptive reuse projects tend to revitalize areas, attracting young and small businesses. Also, if your property is located within a local district or a national register district, the designation gives it significance that may offer protection from inappropriate changes and new development, which in turn can protect one's own investment in the property and improve the property value and resale values. So here are the general summary of the things that we learned from the economic impact study that was done in 2018. We do realize that the study is now a little bit 7 years later, but after looking at 20 years of MLS data and seeing what is currently happening within Saratoga's real estate market, we do not believe that anything actually has really changed. Saratoga Springs has 8 local historic districts and that collectively cover only 6% of the land area. And think about that. 11% of the population lives within a historic district, and that 6% of land area in the historic district contributes 14% of the total assessed value of the city. Now that means that it results in dollars to our schools, our fire, our police department, our infrastructure. That directly positively impacts our cities. 2% of the jobs in the city are located in historic districts. Historic districts house 31% of all jobs at small firms, and 46% of jobs at young firms. You're seeing people that want to live in vibrant downtowns and that are historic. That's where people are gravitating to. They're walkable communities, and that's what people are attracted to. Historic districts are more racially and economically diverse than the city as a whole. Now, people found this shocking when we did the study, but it was true. So think about that. Houses in a local historic district are more valuable per square foot and are increasing in value more rapidly than comparable properties and not in historic districts. So I'm just going to go through some quick graphs so you can see that. Here you have the average house value. You have the value per square foot. You have an annual change in value. You see that increase in value over time continues to increase. Just more showing that percentage and change. This also by district. It was consistent regardless of what district throughout the city of Saratoga Springs. By condition, even if a building is in poor condition or not great condition, regardless, if it is in a historic district, it has a higher value. Regardless of style, if it's in a historic district versus not, versus a number of per square foot by style. Typical of a certain 3-bedroom versus 2-bedroom. And then you see that there's greater distribution of income in historic districts versus not in historic districts, the share of jobs. Historic preservation, all in all, is good for communities. PlaceEconomics did a great publication called 24 Reasons. I encourage you to check it out. But of all the things that they mentioned, they're right here: property values, jobs, heritage tourism. I mean, that is such a huge part of what makes people want to come to Saratoga. It's historic downtown. It's historic racecourse. It's our historic neighborhoods. It's all of those combined that help to improve our heritage tourism. We've found that people who come to a city who have an interest in heritage tourism, they're likely to stay longer, shop local, attend more local cultural events. Their dollars are going farther if they come because of heritage tourism. Foreclosure patterns, walkability, environmental responsibility, smart growth. The list is so long as to why preservation is so important. And I encourage you again to visit PlaceEconomics to check out that publication. But not only does he have that publication, he's done cities across the United States that look at the economic impacts, whether it's Savannah, San Antonio, Indianapolis, New York City, cities all across the country that show the benefits of historic preservation. So moving on, because we're going through the basics. So we've talked about how the preservation movement in a very general national way it came about. We talked about a lot of the myths with preservation, and then we talked about the economic impacts. Now we're going to move into some general architectural styles, most of which we find here in Saratoga Springs, but hopefully most of these should be in other cities where some of you may be tuning into and tuning in from. My apologies, guys. So we'll get started. We'll first talk about Greek Revival style. This is a style that was popular between the 1820s and 1860s. As you can see, it resembles a Greek temple. It has a very symmetrical facade. You will see that the window bays and the doors and window bays line up symmetrically. They have columns. Most of them are Doric columns. They have a pediment, a triangular pediment, and a solid panel door with a transom and side lights. And often the windows are small paned, 6/6, because at that time, they were not able to make large panes of glass. This style is very prominent throughout New York State, and we're fortunate in Saratoga Springs to have several. So I'm sure there may be one or two in your area. We have the Gothic Revival style, 1840s to 1880s. This actually is one of our endangered buildings in our city. It is a local landmark that you see here, but it has a steeply pitched roof, often has those decorative verge boards in the gable, sometimes decorative slate roofs, extended windows extending into the gable, and they often have those Gothic arched windows that you see. And then the porches have these delicate, slender columns with these flattened, what it looks like I say is like somebody is pushing top down on the top of an arch and makes them flattened. So that's the Gothic Revival style. And what I think is so great about architectural styles as we move through these styles is that you can see, based on when the time period of these styles were popular, you can see how a city developed by the style of architecture. It's just really interesting to be able to look at different styles of architecture and see the development of a city. Another very popular style in Saratoga Springs and in New York is the Italianate style. And in New York, here in Saratoga Springs, we see an example of all different types. We have the asymmetrical tower with the tower that is reminiscent of an Italian farmhouse or villa. We have the symmetrical version with the cupola on top. And then we see the townhouse style. They typically have a low-pitched roof with wide overhanging eaves with heavy decorative brackets, tall, narrow windows that often have decorative windows, crowns, or surrounds, paired narrow wood front doors, and as I mentioned, the cupola and tower. Very similar to that style, which was popular between 1855 and 1885, is the Second Empire style. And largely it was revived during the reign of Napoleon III during France's Second Empire. The mansard roof is its primary characteristic, which really sets it apart, which was named for the French architect Francois Mansart. Here is a fine example that we have in Saratoga Springs of that Second Empire, but most people know the mansard roof and Second Empire style from Paris, my favorite city, aside from Saratoga Springs, of course. You'll often see dormered windows with decorative brackets, but you can see that they're very similar in style to the Italianate style with those decorative window surrounds and narrow front doors. Then we have the Queen Anne style. The Queen Anne style becomes popular between 1880 and 1910. And this really is when everything goes away from very symmetrical to asymmetrical forms. You don't see the windows and doors line up as much, but what you see are varied wall patterns. You'll see different types of wood shingles. You'll see clapboard. You'll see stone. You'll see often a tower. Now, in this example, which is a house on North Broadway, you see the round tower with the conical roof. And then actually behind the tree is a square tower with a bulbous roof. You'll see these decorative windows. You'll often see full widths or partial front porch or a wraparound porch, and really an exuberant style of architecture, a lot of interest, and we're very fortunate to have a lot of great Queen Anne's within the city of Saratoga Springs. Another example of architecture is the Richardsonian Romanesque, which is also popular about the same time as the Queen Anne style between 1880 and 1900. This was named after Henry Hobson Richardson, who was a Boston architect who was responsible for local, not in the capital region, the City Hall of Albany. He was also one of the contributors to the New York State Capitol, Boston's Trinity Church, just to name a few of the buildings that he had a role in. What you will see is brick and rough-faced stone, often with a pink mortar. You'll see with that rough-cut stone foundation. You again will see that sort of squatted arch, and you'll see deeply set windows. There are often references to nature. So, for example, in this house that's on North Broadway, there are terracotta tiles with leaves and floral details, and this will often have a cross-gable roof with dormers and towers. This one has a really great prominent chimney in the front of the house. Another popular architectural style, we don't here in Saratoga have as many, but you'll see them elsewhere, is the shingle style. Its name is relatively evident in that it's clad in shingles. You'll see that the shingles actually wrap around the building. They typically don't have corner boards or corner trim. They often have a gambrel roof, which is the roof style that you see here in this photo. It often will have a ribbon of windows, like you see at the top of this gable, and windows that have they have a decorative pattern on the upper sash and large window sashes, large single window sash on the bottom. So this is an example of the shingle style. Then we have the colonial revival style, which really goes back and tries to take all the earlier styles and puts them together. So for example, you see that we move away from the asymmetric building of Queen Anne's. You see that the bays and the doors often in the colonial revival style align. You see that they go back to those smaller window panes, even though at this point in time, you can have larger panes of glass made, but you see that they go back to that. You see that they go back to the transom and the side lights. So really taking a lot of colonial details, federal, Georgian, some of the styles we didn't touch on in any detail during this presentation, but you see that they borrow from these earlier styles to bring back what they call the colonial revival style. And this was really quite popular for a long period of time, and you see it throughout the United States, especially from the 1920s, 1930s, and 40s, post-World War II, you'll see still some of the colonial revival style. Then we have the neoclassical style, which has this very dominated full height porch with roof supported with classical columns, typically much more decorative, the Ionic or the Corinthian columns. Again, going back to that symmetrical facade, hipped roof and dormers and low balustrade and elaborate doorways. Then there's the Tudor revival style. Here you have that steeply pitched roof with a dominant front gable, decorative half timbering, tall, narrow windows, often multi-pane and made out of metal. And then a doorway with that cut stone, or you see that coin effect through this style of architecture, and often have a prominent chimney. More typical between, I would say, 1920 and 1940, but you do see it come earlier on in some grander homes. Then we have the architectural, our last one that we're going to cover, because we're not going to go into mid-century or the ranch, but I really was focusing on the styles that are most prominent to Saratoga, but the craftsman style, which really takes looks back to nature, has those low pitched gable roof, wide eaves with exposed rafters, extended, and oftentimes they're just decorative, but they're meant to sort of show the construction of the building. Often incorporates a lot of stone and slate in some of the more high style ones. You'll see a stone chimney. The bungalow the craftsman became very popular with kit homes. So you see simpler homes through a lot of American cities. The Sears and Roebuck, my own house is a kit house, Aladdin kit house. So they can range from more ornate to simple, but typically a very prominent style. There's lots more styles and lots to learn about styles and features of those styles on what I think is really what I would consider the Bible to identifying American house styles is A Field Guide to American Houses by Virginia McAllister. This is actually the second edition. If you don't have a copy, I encourage you to check one out at your library or to purchase one. It really is We've got a tremendous amount of information to help you learn about the different styles, details. You can learn so much about the history of a community by, again, looking at the styles of architecture. Just for reference, in Saratoga, we have 6 historic districts listed on the National Register. And we have, I think 8 local historic districts. And actually, the boundaries do not align, which is unfortunate, which always makes for a little bit of confusion. But I encourage you to look at these maps to have a better understanding of if your house is located in a historic district listed on the National Register of Historic Places, or if it's in a local district. And it's really, really important to understand the difference between the local historic districts and those listed on the National Register. I touched on that earlier, but I'm going to just reiterate it, that federal law, the listing of a property in National Register, places no restrictions on what a non-federal owner may do with their property, including destruction, unless the property is involved in a project that receives federal assistance, which usually means funding and permitting. It is the local historic district overlay ordinance that may require review and approval by a city. So, for example, in the City of Saratoga Springs, the Design Review Board reviews and approves exterior alterations, new construction, and demolition in the local historic and architectural review districts. The Design Review Board here in Saratoga Springs is comprised of 7 volunteers appointed by the mayor. Members have relevant experience in historic preservation, architecture, construction, and history, just to name a few. And then just to to learn more about the City of Saratoga Springs and the land use boards, I encourage you to visit their website. There's information about the Design Review Board, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals. You can review the historic review ordinance, the historic district design guidelines, which if you have a property and you're going to undertake a project, strongly encourage you to look at those guidelines, because that is what the Design Review Board bases their review upon. We also, and on that website is the Wait Before You Renovate brochure, and to see the most current map of the historic and architectural review districts, I encourage you again to visit saratoga-springs.org to learn about a lot more about that information. Lastly, I will just touch on the role of the foundation. Our organization was established in 1977 to preserve and enhance the architectural and cultural landscape heritage of Saratoga Springs. The foundation carries out its mission through advocacy, technical assistance, and education and restoration. The foundation is separate and distinct from the City of Saratoga Springs. We often get confused, but we are very much 2 separate entities. The foundation provides only advisory opinions to the land use boards of Saratoga Springs, promoting best preservation practices. The foundation also serves as a resource. We maintain property files, provide historic information and research, as well as are happy to meet with property owners who are considering a project, help them to realize whether or not they're eligible for rehabilitation tax credits, help them understand the design review process if they'd like. And we work with the City of Saratoga Springs on a variety of projects, including building surveys, updating and reviewing the historic review ordinance, developing the design guidelines that I mentioned earlier, and we undertake restoration projects throughout the city. We are a membership-based organization, and if you want to learn more about our resources or our organization, or to set up a consultation with us, encourage you to visit our website at saratogapreservation.org. With that, I have 10 minutes for questions. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm happy to answer any. Anonymous attendee. Yes, our plaque program. Thank you for asking about our historic plaque program. We prior to COVID, we received we got a huge backlog of people who are interested in the history of their buildings, which was great. But that program is largely done through volunteers, and we had to just put the program on hold until we could get through that backlog. I'm pleased to say that we are, I hope in the next 3 to 5, 6 months, we'll just say 3 to 6 months, we will be able to open that program back up again. So I encourage you to follow back up, maybe, like I said, late summer or mid-fall, and we hope we can help you with that plaque program. Sorry that you have to wait. Are there any other questions that I can help with? Well, if there are no more, I guess we won't keep you any longer. I can't believe there's not a single question out there. But maybe everybody learned everything that they needed to know. Well, thank you. Thanks for being attending. Really do appreciate. I hope you came away with something and learned something that maybe you didn't already know. This will be recorded, and we will share it on our the foundation's YouTube channel once it's available. I do see. Do you have issues with realtors not informing folks who want to buy in a historic district? I think that I don't know whether or not it's intentional. I wouldn't say that, but yes, there is a challenge where unfortunately homeowners do not do their best due diligence to learn about where their property is located, whether or not it is in a historic district or not. We've in the past done some a realtor education program, and we do try to have as much information available. We try in partnership with the City of Saratoga Springs. We hope to, in the very near future, to send out the Wait Before You Renovate brochure to property owners located in a historic district, just so that people become aware of that. But yes, that is a challenge. Anything else? I know that the recording will probably be available, I would say, by Monday of next week, and we will have it on our website and like I said, on our YouTube. But everybody who registered for the program, we will email that link out to them. I'm trying to think, there was one other thing I wanted to say. We will have future programs, and so please check back and on that. And I think I'm seeing, and there was something about tax credits or grants for like a building owned by a city. Yes, there can be grants for city-owned or buildings by nonprofits. There are also ways to, for nonprofits who don't pay taxes, you can syndicate or sell your tax credits, so to help offset that cost. I don't know if there's any other questions. I'm trying. I guess since I have a captured audience, I will share that the foundation is going to have its historic homes tour May 11th, which is a tour of private homes, and they're going to be featured on North Broadway of this year. So if you want an opportunity to see some of the houses on North Broadway, I encourage you to check out our website. Again, I don't think I missed any other questions. It's 12:55. I wanted to keep it to an hour. Again, I appreciate everyone who tuned in and hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you.